So I'm John, CEO and co-founder of Mantra. We're building a real-world asset-focused blockchain built on the Cosmos SDK. I'm going to unpack a little bit about why RWAs are one of the biggest hype narratives of this cycle, but at the same time, a lot of stuff that's happening in RWA is still, frankly, bullshit. So we're going to unpack a little bit about what's going on. We do have some slides. I'm probably not going to use them too much. I'm going to just talk a little bit more about our experience, what we're working on. And honestly, if you guys have any questions at any time, stop me and ask. So maybe I'll talk a little bit more about Mantra's history first and like how we kind of got into RWA. We like to say that we've been doing RWAs or asset tokenization before it was even called RWAs. Used to call it STO or any other acronym, but this has been going on as an idea about tokenizing assets for a very, very long time, right? So before we even started Mantra, which was back in DeFi summer 2020, I was working with a US broker-dealer, and we did a tokenized private placement where we tokenized a professional basketball player's contract under a Reg D offering in the US in 2019. And it was super manual. It wasn't really DeFi at all, but it was an initial foray into how this idea of asset tokenization can work. And frankly, it didn't work. It was way too early. We did eventually offer it properly and compliantly under US SEC rules and regulations, but no one wanted to buy a basketball player's shitcoin when COVID was happening and the world was imploding. So we had to kind of move on and do something else, and that's where Mantra came about. When we initially launched Mantra in 2020, DeFi summer, we were building out on Polkadot. I know. We ended up trying to basically create a permissionless DeFi DAO that had a bunch of different products. We had staking, long tail, lend and borrow. We had a launchpad that was fairly successful for a little bit. We also ran a lot of validator infrastructure, primarily for Cosmos SDK chains. So that's kind of how we got exposed to the ecosystem. And we had some success. We got listed on Binance in March of 2021, and then the DeFi bubble popped, or DeFi 1.0 popped. Everyone shifted into NFTs and GameFi, play to earn, and whatever else was the the hype thing of the last cycle. So we had to go back to the drawing board, and we got back in touch with our our friends in the US and said, hey, you have this interesting license that we can use. We have now built a bunch of on-chain, smart contract-based tech. Let's see if we can bridge these two things together, right? So we thought about that. We started working together, looking at the US market, and then lo and behold, another implosion. That was Luna. Oh, I know. And then FTX and everything else, right? It just kept going. So the US regulatory landscape, as everyone I'm sure knows, slowed way, 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 way down. And again, we had to go back to the drawing board. So we started looking elsewhere. We explored Europe, we explored Middle East, we explored Asia, and ended up settling on the Middle East, basically making Dubai our home of homes for basically exploring this idea of asset tokenization on-chain. When it comes to real-world assets, there is this idea of compliance, of KYC, of AML concerns, and how do you kind of build something that's both, crypto native and accessible for the, the people who are actually using things on-chain today, but at the same time making sure that the overlords, the regulatory overlords, are okay with what you're building. So when we were thinking about that, we had to go back to the drawing board and we're like, okay, building on Ethereum or Ethereum mainnet or ETH2 is just not really going to work for us. We actually do need sovereignty over our validator set. We do need this composability and this broader crypto ecosystem that IBC presents. So we really decided that it was critically important for us to have our own sovereign L1, and we chose to build that on the Cosmos SDK. So there's so many different assets that can be tokenized, and from our perspective, we don't really care. We're exploring real estate, we're exploring private credit, private debt, private equity, commodities, other types of securities, content, IP, whatever. But from our perspective as a protocol, honestly, as long as there's someone who wants to buy it, trade it, invest in it, etc., we don't really care. So anything under the sun can be tokenized. Doesn't necessarily mean that anything under the sun should be tokenized. I think in the last cycle, a lot of people were just optimizing for this idea that putting a token on it is immediately going to give you distribution. It's immediately going to give you liquidity. It's immediately going to make it attractive for people to buy. That's freaking bullshit. None of that's true. You need to have a high-quality asset. You need to have distribution channels. And you need to actually create something that's bringing value to the underlying asset itself, right? That's something that we're really, really hyper-focused on. So how do we do this, right? So again, as I mentioned, we're building a permissionless Cosmos L1. I think that's very, very important. Permissionless Cosmos L1. We have a permissionless layer and a permission layer. On the permissionless layer, anyone can read and write on the blockchain. On the permission side, obviously, we need to have access granted to be able to do so. So we built the standard Cosmos SDK blockchain, but we did create a couple custom modules in order to make sure we adhere to regulatory requirements for the applications that are particularly being built specifically for real-world asset tokenization. So these comprise 3 core custom modules. The first is a decentralized ID. All right, so I have a personal opinion that people in crypto actually, most people in crypto actually don't mind doing KYC. You might say, oh, I completely disagree with you, John, but actually, what I think they mind is doing KYC over and over and over again, right? Doing it more than once, doing it once kind of sucks. Doing it like 5 times really sucks. So if you're going to do KYC one time and then have that bound to your on-chain wallet address, then you can interact with 10 different products that are on-chain, self-custodial, accessible in a semi-permissionless fashion, I personally believe, or my hypothesis is it's actually not as big of a deal as you'd initially think it might be, right? So we've created this decentralized ID module, which effectively takes your credentials, where you're from, are you retail, are you accredited, what country are you based in, et cetera. And it allows you to then kind of passport that into a real-world asset tokenization module and a compliance SDK module that then allows you to be able to be granted access to different products, to different platforms very easily from the same wallet. I think the other added value of this is that if you are identified on-chain with your decentralized ID, one, you can maintain privacy in terms of everyone else you're interacting with still doesn't necessarily know who you are. It is a walled garden kind of experience, right? So it is a peer-to-peer transactional arrangement. But at the same time, you can still maintain regulatory compliance with the app developer itself. So I believe, that regulatory enforcement occurs at the application layer, not the protocol layer. So the apps themselves are the ones who are bound to regulatory enforcement, and they need to make sure that if they're operating an application in a certain way, in a certain country, if they're doxed, as we like to call it in crypto, they need to be doing it in a certain way that abides with regulations. So, and complete anonymity, anonymity is not necessarily what the regulator's first best thing. But anywho, with this decentralized ID connected to your wallet, you can then interact with other traditional, fiat banking systems. You can interact with brokerage accounts in the TradFi world. So you can have a lot of different exposure to, this, on-chain experience that you don't have in the permissionless DeFi side of things, for the most part. If you combine that with the second module, which is this RWA tokenization module, effectively what it allows developers to build or issue is just very simple, RWA tokens, STO-type tokens, utility tokens that have very, just standard smart contract functions for burn, pause, mint, freeze, seize in certain cases, although that's a little bit of a tricky one. But when you're talking about RWAs, there are certain assets that you like. Let's just say I tokenize a real estate building or a house. Like if someone hacks my wallet and takes my coins, takes my tokens, that doesn't mean they should take my house. So you kind of have to be able to have some sort of oversight and ability to take back things in certain cases, and also reissue them. For example, if you lose access to a wallet or something like that, right? And then the third bit is this compliance SDK. Effectively, what you could consider it is like a permissioning, or what we call it actually the guard module. This makes it very easy for both Web 2 developers, Web 2 builders, as well as Web 3 developers and builders to easily create permissioned on-chain applications and products. And in combination, what this effectively allows you to do is have this wallet that's effectively like an attribute-based whitelisting schema that interacts with the token module, which says these are the tokens that can interact with a retail investor from this, and this country. And then the rules are then set by this customizable governance framework at the app level, which then writes it to the blockchain, codifies it in the smart contract, and enacts and enforces this compliance on-chain. Right? So that's how it all kind of fits together. Why Cosmos? I think I talked about it a little bit. There's a number of reasons, but frankly, we love the ecosystem. We love that it has this idea of sovereignty at its core. And for us, this idea about having sovereignty over a validator set was incredibly important. We had the Skip Chads up talking about sovereignty earlier, where we would love those guys, the sovereign badasses, I call them, who really understand this idea of making sure that when you're talking about a real-world asset blockchain, you're talking about highly regulated asset classes. You're talking about interactions with regulatory agencies all over the world, and you need to be able to upgrade with regulatory requirements. And to be able to do this at a global level, you need to make sure that your validator set is sovereign, and you're not necessarily beholden to something like Ethereum mainnet and an L2. One of the other reasons I think is incredibly important is, frankly, just also back to the sovereign chat, this idea of grandeur that we want to have, right? So Cosmos is the one ecosystem, in my opinion, where products that are built utilizing the Cosmos tech stack can be bigger than the token of the Cosmos Hub, which is attributed to Atom, right? If you look at Terra as an example, Terra was a Cosmos-based Cosmos SDK chain, and it was the top 5 token in the world before it blew up. So the idea of not having a ceiling and upward potential is incredibly important. If you're L2, you're going to always be basically capped at a certain level, because if you're on Optimism or Arbitrum, why would the L2 of that be any bigger than the actual tech stack that you're building on? It just hasn't happened yet. So, again, we do love Cosmos. I think we've technically upgraded to v0.5 now, I think, or maybe tomorrow, with Comet BFT. We use CosmWasm, and we obviously are big fans of IBC. I think IBC is the perfect playground for RWAs because you allow this interoperability standard for real-world assets to live on a permission layer that we have on Interchain, but then be able to interact in the same wallet with DYDX, with Osmosis, with Kujira, with any of these other amazing products in the Cosmos ecosystem via IBC, and frankly, beyond. So again, this idea of modularity is also an important one. We look at it from the perspective of like modular governance and modular kind of compliance. And I think the other thing that's quite important for us when we talk about Cosmos is this app chain thesis. We're definitely subscribers to this app chain idea. But we have, as we've developed over the time, decided to actually split out the application from the chain. So the chain itself, Mantra, real-world asset-focused blockchain. We're building also an on-chain exchange product, which effectively becomes the RWA portal for assets to trade, to have liquidity, and to be able to interact with retail investors as well as institutional investors all over the world. So we're building an on-chain club, effectively. I think what's quite important here is 2 things. One, it is a permission product. So you do have to onboard properly. It is seeking regulation from VARA. VARA is the virtual asset regulator in Dubai. We believe we will be the first self-custodial on-chain exchange product to get licensed by VARA. We've been working a very, very long time and very hard to get this license. We initially, honestly, went to Dubai because we're like, oh shit, this is going to be easy. 2 years later, it is not easy, I will tell you. But effectively, what we're building with Omega is this on-chain club that allows you to trade as well as swap real-world assets as well as digital assets very simply and easily from your wallet. I think one thing that's important is just because there's an exchange product, even if it's licensed, does not mean that you're going to have liquidity. Right? It doesn't mean that you're going to have users. And I think this idea of exchanges is that the problem with exchanges is you have cold start issues. Highly capital intensive. You need to have users before you have liquidity, and before you have users, you need liquidity. So how the hell do you do that? Token incentives only work so long. So I think it's quite important to figure that out. And one of the ways that we're doing it is actually leveraging our TradFi and kind of more institutional roots in our institutional investor network by effectively creating like a brokerage model that effectively is kind of more white glove, boutique, and behind the scenes that also does effectively private placements of these real world assets behind the scenes, but then actually writes them to the chain to bring a little bit of liquidity as the retail adoption takes place. And this is a long-term game, honestly. Like real world assets, I think the total market cap of like true real world asset projects is like maybe a few billion. It's nothing. Like we on our tagline say we're unlocking the $16 trillion RWA economy or something like that. I should probably know that, but better. But anyway, that's even just the tip of the iceberg, right? Like, and we don't actually know what real world asset tokenization is actually going to unlock because there's so much illiquid assets out there that could and should be tokenized. So it's still just a drop in the ocean, and there's a long way to go for this kind of thing to become actually as ubiquitous as I believe it will be. So yeah, I talked about this. Multi-asset DEX, 24/7 trading, capitally efficient because of the club, yada, 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 okay. So, no, I mean, it's okay. Like, I'm here to have fun and just talk, shit about RWAs. We have a panel later. We'll talk more about it, so it's all good. But I will talk about some of the interesting things that we've been working on. More recently was this one right here, where we're tokenizing $500 million with a real estate, massive real estate developer, MAG Group in the UAE and Dubai. So how are we doing that? Why are we doing it? And what does it actually mean? Honestly speaking, these guys do not need to tokenize this $500 million of real estate. It is off-plan property that they could use. They could honestly just sell it. They could go to the bank and take funding. They could fund it themselves. They're like a $10 billion conglomerate. They don't need to use us. But I think what asset tokenization in general, as well as our kind of positioning in the UAE has done for us is really investing in this idea that this is the future. And the product that we're offering is effectively a debt financing of real estate that pays up to, well, it pays 8% stablecoin interest per annum for 3 years. And then it also will pay an additional interest or yield in Ohm tokens, which will be able to be fluctuating. We'll underwrite the first 4 or 5% for the first year for sure, no matter what happens with Ohm price. But the second and third one, you know, it could go up to, I mean, if Ohm doubles, hopefully, fingers crossed, NFA, you know, that interest could go up pretty significantly. The idea here is that, one, you can basically get the safety and security of the, you know, the underlying yield and be able to speculate on Ohm. So that's one idea. The other thing that's quite cool about this product is it's over-collateralized by a $75 million key real estate asset, basically a Dubai mega mansion. So honestly, in your best case, they default and you get to keep the house. Which would be cool. But anywho, this is a pretty interesting product and an interesting use case for tokenization, because after you participate in the bond, you can participate in that financing yield opportunity, and then you can use your principal that you get back at the end of the tenure to actually buy the property if you so choose. So you actually get to double dip a little bit, which is quite interesting. So we have an incentivized testnet going on. I think we have some of the validators in the room who are participating, some people in the room who are already participating in the testnet. We've had really great numbers and really great uptick. Millions of participants. Hopefully we have many more. Check it out if you're interested on Hongbai. Hongbai is quite important. I'll just talk a little bit about that. I'm based in Hong Kong. A lot of our team's in Hong Kong as well as Dubai. So Hongbai is an allude to Hong Kong and Dubai, which is our focus, Middle East and Asia. I don't know what we're supposed to say about this one. Check it out. Oh, this is a cool one. So I think I'm supposed to be on a panel with Yelena from Noble later. I know that they just launched USDY natively on Noble. So USDY is the yield-bearing product from Ondo. Ondo is one of our partners as well as Noble's partners. Effectively, it's tokenized treasury yield in the form of like a stable-like coin. We will be launching a new Ondo pool called the Chakra Pool, where you can basically deposit your stable coins permissionlessly. You can earn additional yield from US Treasuries, as well as from Ondo tokens and Ohm tokens. So there's pretty significant Ohm there. So if you don't have exposure, that might be a good way to get it, but also have the safety and security of the US government paying you 5%. And yeah, I mean, I have like a minute left, so if there's any questions, happy to take it. If not, thank you very much, and we can talk more about RWAs on the panel coming up. Thank you. I don't know. Any questions? There's a question.
You can? Yeah? Okay.
So yeah, you said you've got DID module. Do you have your own DID method, or are you using, what DID method are you using? Are you actually using like decentralized identifiers that way?
So could you say that a little bit more detail? Like,
So the DID module.
Yep.
Are you using decentralized identifiers and like verifiable credentials?
Yeah, so the idea over time is to have it a little bit more similar to what you just said, where we actually have like ZK proofs for the actual ID, so it's not necessarily, it's obfuscated from the validators, and only the validators would be the one validating it. Right now we have like a centralized entity that actually verifies the user ID. So we actually work with like a Jumio as well as like an actual compliance team that has to manually review. And that's more because if you think about it from the application layer, like that's a requirement from Vara actually in our case. But ideally what we have is multiple different verifiers and issuers. So it's not just us, right? Like you can basically have all the metadata sharing or showing, Omega is the verifier of this ID, but XYZ is the verifier of that one. You just have the same metadata that says this person's from here, they're from there, they're retail, they have all this information. Some applications might require you to put more information up for approval, but other ones can just accept it on the face of it. The idea is that in order to avoid malicious verification, you would, as a verifier, have to like stake some sort of Ohm. You would stake Ohm, and if you obviously verify bad identities, then you would get slashed. Exactly. It'd be on their Kepler, their Leap, their MetaMask, their yeah. Any other question? Yeah. Timeline for mainnet. So what I can say publicly is after the summer and before the US election, so sometime in there. So pretty soon, pretty soon.